Alright everyone, we start off today talking about the Wuhan lab leak theory, and I use that term very loosely because I've been saying that that's the presumptive origin of COVID since literally early last year, long before it was admitted as even a possibility by the legacy media. Link in the description, archived of course. Look at the apologism of this CNN article, and just imagine this is only one of the many examples of propaganda that we're getting from the legacy media on this token. They're doing everything that they can to muddy the waters, which is a common propaganda technique. You know where COVID came from, so you pretend that you don't know, and you pretend that it's all up in the air. Well, maybe it came from Wuhan, but it could have been a pangolin. It could have been someone eating a snake burger. Those are all very, very likely, by the way. Trying to debunk. By the way, before I get into the bulk of the video, I don't even know how this really debunks the Wuhan lab leak theory. Because if you look at the article, it's explaining the three main coincidences that lead people to believe that's the origin. Like, oh, it just happened to emerge right next to the biolab, right after it moved closer to this location, and several lab workers got sick before the main outbreak. But, those are all just coincidences. Those aren't proof of anything. CNN doesn't want to investigate anything. Links, by the way, down below in a pinned comment if you're watching this video on YouTube. Keep in mind, I make 4 great videos a day. Only 2 of those great videos are on YouTube. You're only getting half a clank if you're just watching me there. It's a sad existence. I'm going to stop linking the Substack, though, in the pinned comments because I think I've made the point at this point. I make sporadic journalistic content in the literary sense as well. This is hilarious because the real conspiracy theory is that nothing bizarre happened with regards to COVID. Now, this comes in multiple forms. Some people claim the virus was engineered, that is outright built from scratch. I don't necessarily believe that. Some think that there was gain of function involved, and Fauci, having visited this lab around the time he was writing a paper saying that fiddling with pathogens was a good idea for disease research, and that if we cause a pandemic, it's ultimately worth it. This is some mad scientist tier stuff. I think it's entirely possible modifications were made. Or it could just be that it was sequestered in the lab, it was a natural pathogen, but the reason why it entered the human vector specifically is because of contact with humans due to an accidental leak. I think that's the most likely. I think specifically what happened is that they isolated the virus, it got out accidentally, and there was a cover-up essentially. They were hoping it was less transmissible than it ended up being. Hoping that it was less mutation-prone than it ended up being. China then covered its ass. The U.S. helped them very, very helpfully. It's interesting how both propagandistic legacy media and big tech in the West, which supposedly has no links to China, started covering for them. You had literal censorship of medical misinfo, like on YouTube and Facebook, even for things that were openly speculated by physicians, by medical professionals, simply because they didn't concord with what the WHO said. But the WHO is led by a Marxist and contains undue influence from the Chinese state. I'll tell you why these US firms would do that. I'll tell you why essentially they were softballed. First was the election. That's the more obvious one. Second is because of the culpability of the Obama admin and then the incoming, and they honk totally didn't know that, Biden administration. Biden was VP when the Wuhan lab was being openly funded and research in part helped by the United States. The release of COVID from this lab, which I do believe is what happened. I can't prove it, but I do believe that's the most likely origin because everything makes sense if you assume that. Nothing seems to make sense if you assume all of those connections are coincidental. I think they helped China to cover it up. I think there's a reason why not one legacy media outlet, not one major government official in the United States higher up, not one of these people, don't you think this is a little bit odd? Has called out China's obviously fudged death totals. Not one of them has come out and said, how is it that China, magically, above all other nations in the world, managed to contain coronavirus and now everything is hunky-dory? Why is this the one nation in the world where there was no considerable problem? It's either because this was a planned event, which would mean it was a bioweapon, which I'm not alleging, but some people do, or because they're fucking around with the data. But nobody in the West is talking about that. It's because they've shared partial culpability. If it turns out, if the public were to know the real facts, which is that a lab that was set up in part by the United States, and this isn't even argued, this is objective, we've got pictures of Obama and Fauci in the fucking lab itself. The United States in the 2010s decided to help set up this lab. What appears to have happened potentially is that they moved the lab, and during that moving process, protocol, of course, was more slipshod. And because of the Chinese system the way it is academically, if you know anything about Chinese academics, cheating is prevalent. Cheating and bribery. So there's huge pressure among Chinese families for their children to do well. So if the kid's getting B's, he can slip you some yen and make those A's. And it's very lucrative, and the Chinese state officially disavows this, but ultimately largely turns a blind eye because it wants people to be in those successful positions. And it really loves money because communists are greedy. That's why they try to take everything from everybody else. What happens is you have a bunch of C students in a temporary facility that's not even completed, that's holding potential bioweapons. Don't you think it's a recipe for disaster? I love how they tried to blame it on snake meat and pangolins and eating like monkey brains and shit like that. It's like, those wet markets, while they're a disease vector, they exist all the time. They're not just in China, they're all over Asia and other parts of the world as well. Look at the bushmeat problem. It doesn't really make sense. You're in an urban area, and you're arguing that the first time that this highly transmissible disease had a human vector just happens to be because of a wet market, as opposed to it potentially having been accidentally or purposefully released. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. In fact, it almost argues that the virus was modified. And of course, I've pointed out, if that is the case, if you look at it, let's just say this is an accident. So many people have died of COVID, according to testing standards, at least supposedly, that it's equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons. Shouldn't we be considering this an act of war? The rest of the world should technically blockade China and tell them your government will step down and you'll disarm both your facility here and all of your nuclear weapons will be disarmed and you will be occupied because you essentially unleashed WMDs on the world. You essentially nuked the world on a minor scale. If this were an accidental release of a couple of single megaton nuclear weapons, whoops, we accidentally hit Taiwan. Whoops, we killed 1 million people, sorry. Oh yeah, we accidentally hit Tokyo, killing 10 million more. It would be everyone would condemn it. There would be not a single person in the world, West or East Bloc, who would accept the explanation. They'd call for Beijing to step down. They'd call for the dissolution of the entire Chinese government, to be shamed and to be occupied and disarmed unilaterally by the rest of the world, demanding they do so or be nuked in reprisal. Why is it that with a bioweapon, potentially, which is 10 times worse than a nuke, that's not happening? Even if it's an accidental release of an otherwise natural pathogen that never had any engineering done to it, the official story makes no sense. I said back last March, or even February, I think I might have pointed it out, that the likely origin was this Wuhan lab, because put two and two together, the fact that the epicenter was right next to this relatively new, recently moved biolab, the only level 4 facility in China, that made sense. Pangolin meat did not make sense. Snake sandwich didn't make sense. I think there were only a handful of other people at the time that pointed it out, and then YouTube quickly cracked down, and all the other big tech sites, for China, apparently, to prevent people from talking about that until literally the last couple of weeks. Now it's fine. You see, now CNN is speculating, so we're allowed to speculate. It's very mysterious. There are a lot of new tech exclusives on BitChute and Odyssey and Rumble and shit like that that discuss the same issue. It's not like people aren't aware of the fact that the fucking lab existed. It's probably still in operation, which is potentially a problem. And they're handing out all of these RNA vaccines and shit like that. And no, I wonder why people are skeptical. Could it be because the people that are supposed to represent them clearly weren't telling them the truth for the last year? And China's still lying openly about the death totals. They'd have you believe that they had it locked down long ago and everyone could go to concerts. No need for a mask, no need for anything. We vaccinated everyone successfully. Where's the numbers, Beijing? You're not going to get them. That's about all. Peace out.